Good evening, everybody. Let's get this meeting started. We're supposed to start no sooner than 5:30, as Supervisor Cortese taught me. So we're there. We'll call the meeting to order, and we'll start with a roll call. Madam Clerk, you want to read the roll? We'll do it that way.
Member Pionka.
I'm from the Office of the County Council. I'm not a member of the task force.
Ms. Howard. Here. Member Prevetti.
Here.
Supervisor Wasserman.
Here.
Supervisor Cortese.
Here.
Mr. Smith, absent. Member Chiala. Member Kennett. Member Varela. Member O'Day.
Here.
Member Gill.
Here.
Member Hutchison, absent. You have a quorum.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to the clerk and Supervisor Wasserman for calling the meeting to order. It's common knowledge here up on the dais that we co-chair this particular committee, so from time to time we'll kind of trade off duties here on working through the agenda. We do appreciate getting the roll call done, and we'll note that if anyone else comes in late, we'll add them to the record. Item 2 is public comment. Let me ask the clerk if we have received any written requests for public comment this evening.
No.
It appears none. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak under public comment? That would just be an opportunity to speak on something that's not on the agenda tonight, but would be pertinent to county business. Seeing none, we'll move to item 3. This is stakeholder comment. Any formal request to speak on item 3? Again, this is reserved for stakeholders that would be persons who are representatives of government, nonprofit, business, environmental, farming, or ag organizations working on or with an interest in ag preservation in Santa Clara County through land use policies, conservation programs, economic development, or other methods. So this is just another public comment, but to a qualified group of people. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 4, which is the consent calendar. And do we have minutes on the consent? We do. We can entertain a motion on consent if there's no objection.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Wasserman, second by Prevetti. Any comment on the consent item? If not, all in favor signify by aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? That carries unanimously. Thank you. Coming back to the regular agenda and items for discussion, the first such item is item 5, which is to consider recommendations from the Department of Planning and Development relating to the Agricultural Ombuds Program. So we'll turn it over to our distinguished panel at this time. Thank you.
Good evening. Rob Eastwood, Planning Manager. Did also want to introduce next to me Joe Davini, the Agricultural Commissioner, and Michael Meehan, who is our Ag Program Manager. For this item, we hope the staff report generally spoke for itself. I just have a few quick slides to talk about the high points. This is one of the items we're a bit excited about that got a lot of feedback when we were preparing the Ag Plan. And the title is Ag Ombuds, just to sort of qualify that. I know that's a lot of vowels. When I talk about this term, it's often referred to as a farm ombudsperson, a farm ombudsman. When we looked at it, knowing we're intending to serve ranchers, farmers, a variety of agriculturalists, we landed at ag. And just to keep it generally gender neutral, we landed at ombud. So, but I hope the concept is sort of common across all those nomenclatures. So a couple of the high points here on why we're coming to you today with this recommendation. Just want to forward that, Michael. Yeah. Great. So what is ag ombuds? Basically, per the definition of the term, it's someone who acts often between different parties to work things out. In the situation of an ag ombuds, they often act to help farmers and ranchers, generally with permitting and regulatory compliance. Most often it's at the local level, but it can also be state and federal permits. A lot of them help farmers who are sort of improving their businesses, getting into packing, wholesaling, building things, and getting through that process. But they've been known to help out with food safety, with pesticide applications, organic certifications, water regulations, so a wide variety of factors. When we were preparing the ag plan, we heard a couple interesting quotes. I'm not sure if I can verify them all. One was that agriculture is the second most regulated industry in the United States. I'm not sure if that's true. But I do know in general, when there is farming, and to think of the simple concept of growing something out of the soil, taking it out, packaging it, and selling it, there are a host of regulations that come into place. And I do know us working with our farmers over the past couple years that it takes a lot just to get through that process. A couple of our larger farmers actually has a team of 2 to 3 individuals who work for them just on regulatory compliance, but to set the table, dealing with the host of regulations, be it food safety, packing, labor laws, or local building and other codes can often be a challenge. So this person would help with that process, number one. Number two, they can serve as a good resource when counties or North cities or agencies are looking at perhaps some regulatory changes, getting a sense of what's working, what's not. They can advise that process. We know we've been told by many of our farmers, a lot of our codes are very urban specific. If you're building something perhaps that makes sense at Stanford where you have a lot of people there and the public, does that same code, is it applicable to an agricultural building? So I think we could have a bit of intelligence in learning how certain types of buildings could be adaptable in their codes for farming type operations. And then last but not least, really inherent to this ag plan is trying to grow new farmers, for lack of a better term. And we think in tandem with the support of regulatory compliance could be someone who could help with just general business development. So someone who provides that business plan, marketing support, sort of a package approach to permitting and helping someone sort of grow their farming business. So why here? Why in Santa Clara County? We'd like to think with the ag plan, we're an ag county. A lot of people say it's not really an ag county until you sort of put resources in this area. In our Valley Ag Plan, this was one of the, I'd say probably the top 10 items that was recommended. Got a lot of feedback, of course, from farmers that this would be a high priority. Little interesting nomenclature. I put a snippet up there, probably about halfway through the ag process, and working with the Farm Bureau. The president of the Farm Bureau came in and tried to get a farm-to-table permit, and she had a bit of a challenge with that, and in her newsletter sort of had a Shakespearean sort of write-up on what it was. Supervisor Wasserman reminded me at the time I was on page 2 talking about how great the ag plan was. We're on page 1. The president of the Farm Bureau was talking about how frustrated it was to get a permit. So, but in hindsight, it was very illustrative of the challenge she faced as a rancher, just trying to do a simple event and the myriad of different permits that she had to navigate, where an ombuds would be extremely value added. So we thought that was a great anecdote that sort of encapsulated the need for this. In addition to just helping out with business development, permit sort of regulatory compliance, we think there's a lot of crossovers with other programs we're recommending. Michael's going to talk to you about an ag incubator. An ombuds could really help out new farmers and starting off in regulatory compliance in that sort of project, helping with new farmer development. When we're doing our land use updates, we'll talk about that next month. They could provide a bit more intelligence there. And then they could remind our farmers of some of those financial incentives that this task force recommended onto the board that we hope are adopted. So just very informative in telling folks on the things that can either help or to be aware of in a farming business. Some other examples, just real fast. We're not the first ones to providing this program. Sonoma and Marin both provide a full-time ag ombuds person. They're both funded by the county. They're placed in the UC Cooperative Extension. YOLO has a little bit of a different model. Again, another farm ombuds person. It's actually housed in their ag commissioner's office, and they have it sort of wears a different hat with a tandem hat with the cannabis task force manager. San Mateo is the most recent. Their model is a little different. It's funded by the county. It's put in the Resource Conservation District. And then Solano has theirs actually embedded in the Small Business Association, SBDC, sort of that business development function. So there's a variety of kind of different models on where this is placed in their focus, but the general focus has been to provide that permit regulatory business assistance. So to sort of bring this to a summary, what we would recommend, that the task force recommend to the Board of Supervisors, is the creation of an Ag Ombuds program. If the task force recommends it, we would work to formulate either an ordinance or resolution that would enable it, and then from there work on a procurement process with the service provider. In looking at potential partners that could provide this, we identified potentially 3. One would be the UC Cooperative Extension, and there's a member here tonight. If she'd like to speak, Shayla Baylor, who provides services there. UC Cooperative Extension really has a lot of great technical, supportive insight knowledge into farming and how farming works, and they can really provide that technical support. Another option is the Small Business Development Corporation, and currently that corporation in Silicon Valley is partially underwritten by the county, and they provide a great business support service to a lot of businesses, and that service could be provided in tandem with this. And then finally, there is the option of a resource conservation district, although we have 2 and they sort of in different geographic areas. I think initially that might be a bit of a more challenge, knowing the geographic difference, but we know of at least 2 to 3 partners who could be out there to provide the service. And our recommendation on the scope of the program would again be those 3 main areas. One would be that permitting assistance. Second would be to the extent you could support small business development. And then finally, as we go into any updates, they could really provide intelligence and resource back to the county on some regulatory updates. So with that, I'll summarize, turn it back to the chair, and be available for questions. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Let me first ask if there were any requests to speak on item 5 from members of the public. None. We'll turn. Yeah, come on up. Sure.
You got
have to come up here, though.
Come on up to the stand.
If you walk up to that podium, there's a hidden microphone right there where that little box is. So you can just start talking. You'll have up to 3 minutes. There's a timer up here. Thank you.
It's on.
Okay.
Yeah, it's already on.
All right. Well, my name's Eric Martin. Some of you know me, some of you don't. We put on the Gilroy Rodeo this year down in Gilroy, and it was quite an undertaking. You know, we ended up, my wife's family's ranch, an old dairy farm. We decided, you know, clean it up and let's do something with it. And we decided to do a nonprofit rodeo to benefit FFA, 4-H, high school rodeo, that sort of thing, and started the process dealing with the county. And it was, you know, you're talking about this Shakespearean moment with the, you know, the cattle rancher. It was brutal, unlike anything I expected, and you know, it seemed never ending, and you know, until the rodeo day. But you know, some people in the county helped us and found ways to negotiate and get through it. But there was a lot of collateral damage, I think, along the way. It was about $30,000 for 2 days of rodeo and in permits, and you know, it was definitely nonprofit because we ended up about minus 20,000 on the whole thing. So I mean, there's a need for this thing, you know, and I got now we have to get a use permit to do the follow-on rodeo next year. So I just went up and paid the fees for the pre-application for that this morning or earlier today, and that's what I got ahead of me. And it's like, well, it sure would be nice if we had some help on that. You know, it's just a you know, I looked at did a little more research, found out about another use permit for Thorson's Arena, which is another facility down San Martin, and they spent 12 years trying to get a use permit there, and over $300,000, and they weren't even building anything. You know, it's just somehow, some way, it needs to get better. You know, and if this will do it, then you know, I think. But what we're trying to do, I mean, it's not a profit center for me. I'm an electrical contractor by trade, and you know, this is just something for the community, for the kids. I mean, you want to make young farmers and ranchers, you know, they got to have some place to get dirty, you know, and you know, our place is just one place that they should be able to do that, you know. So anyway, I think I'm for this program, and I'd be happy to give them their first project, you know. When you get them. So, all right, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that with us. Supervisor Wasserman?
Thank you. And Eric, it was a great rodeo, by the way.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed ourselves there. Supervisor Cortese, I'm going to make the motion to forward a recommendation to the board to create an agricultural ombuds. This is something Kirk and Joe, and it's Michael. Did I ask you before, are you Ed's younger brother? You're not? All right, I've asked you that. Okay. I think this is an absolute no-brainer. When I got here 8 years ago, as a couple years in, the planning department was facing an audit. They decided to look internally, to reinvent themselves, to make themselves more customer-friendly, to expedite the process. One of the recommendations, and I think Stanford might have been used as a prototype, but one of the recommendations was where a person who's making an application can have a contact at the planning department and have a one-person contact. They can contact and say, where's my project at? As far as health department, fire department, this, that, et cetera, et cetera. Where there could be a person there who said, hey, Tom, hey, Mary, and it wasn't each time a person showed up on the 7th floor, there was somebody new and had to explain what was going on and what you were interested in. You had a person there. And this ombuds person, now I know why I can't say ombudsman, ombuds person with a farming, agricultural knowledge and background would be that perfect, and planning, would be that perfect intermediary between the industry and the community, be it rodeos, ranchers, farmers, whatever, and our planning building department. And I think that's the perfect piece that we're missing that now has the opportunity to make the process much simpler for the applicant to navigate, negotiate, and understand. And I'll make the motion to approve the recommendation to the Board of Supervisors for a full vote by the board. It's that simple for me.
I'll second it, and I have a couple of questions.
Okay, time for questions and comments across the board, so you'll be first. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is, how serious is the county going to take this person? In the sense, is it going to be a county employee full-time at this position? Is it going to be someone somewhere in a staff position as an extra duty? And how's it going to be funded?
Staff.
Yeah, I
Go
can
ahead,
respond. Yeah. The programs you've seen, it's typically not a county employee, and the reason is there's a lot of confidentiality sometimes with farmers and ranchers coming forward and asking questions, and I think if it was a county employee associated with that regulatory process, that discussion gets much more abridged. So the typical programs would be the county will fund it, which means it wants it to work, and we can establish metrics in some programs on how have you actually moved the needle, but it would be an entity that's separate. We think it's one of the 3 agencies we've seen. I think, what some criteria we'd put in is that it's advertised, it's available.
Excuse me, Rob, if I may, I believe it was page 5 on your PowerPoint.
Yes.
If you can go back a couple, as far as the 3 agencies.
Right. And so, that it's intended that person is working very closely. Again, it's a bridge between the agricultural community and the county. And to the extent, we're not just putting resources into a program where it doesn't move the needle, we can think about with the board if we want to establish some criteria and metrics to make sure the program is working.
How's about as a suggestion for a number 4 potential as the Farm Bureau?
We've, throughout the entire process, and I'll talk about with the subcommittee, we've been talking with the Farm Bureau. Everything I've heard from the Farm Bureau, very supportive of the program. As you saw the president, we still chuckle about what happened and don't want it to happen again. I haven't heard any interest from the Farm Bureau actually owning the program. Now, if we go into a process where we do a request for procurement, and if the Farm Bureau changes its minds and would like to provide the service, and it's the best service available to the county, that could be an option, but we just haven't heard that yet.
And through the chair, when he says request for procurement, what Rob's referring to, you might have just heard as an RFP, where we put it out and the people can apply to fulfill the position that's being advertised for, and then the lowest cost, most qualified, whatever those adjectives are, is selected. So that's what an RFP is, and I'm sure they would be open to anyone applying, and then it's a question of figuring out who's the lowest price, most qualified to do the job.
Yes, next.
Thank you. Yes, I certainly want to agree with the motion in the second about supporting this position for an ag ombuds. Eric, the rodeo was great, and I know as Gilroy Welcome Center, we were a strong promoter of that, and it was so much fun. We had a German family stop by the Welcome Center and say, oh, we had no idea Gilroy had rodeos. It was so cool. So good job, and keep it going. I also wanted to comment, I'm hoping that this, whether it's an agency or individual, will be located outside of San Jose, so it's more accessible for those in the area from the south, so that we get interact with someone that it's just logistically an easier process.
Great.
To
Thank you.
comment there, I think we've already made arrangements for this particular position to be at the South County Highland Center there.
Great.
We already have UC Cooperative Extension there and Ag, and we have some space, so I think it'll be a one-stop shopping type of a area. And then, but being able to help up here north when the farmers and ranchers come up for their permits, I think that'll be key too. Like you said, Supervisor Watson, for somebody to be here to help that interaction. And back to comment on Eric Martin's experience too, and a lot of the gentlemen here, they're veterans and they've been through this a lot, and I know that Eric Martin is talented at getting through regulations, so it just really brings home, if we want to support the new farmers and the incubator farmers, it's quite onerous to get started in that direction. So I think all these comments have been really well done tonight.
Okay, let me just ask you, I just want to go back to this one-stop concept. I get it, you know, it's good to have this slide up on slide number 5 here that Supervisor Wasserman asked for. Will this really be put together as a one-stop? I mean, that's what I'd like to see, but fact of the matter is, if you have contracts with service providers, will that be sort of a mandatory part of either amended contracts that you already have with them or a new RFP that basically dictates we don't want people to have to run from one organization to another to get help. I mean, that's how we get in trouble, and that's in addition to the actual cost of fees, is people feel like, you know, they start off here, they have to go somewhere else. You know, age old with planning departments, you know, for years we've worked on streamlining to try to avoid those kind of problems. And I agree with Supervisor Wasserman. Years ago when I was building stuff and, you know, running permits through the county, basically you'd walk in and never see anyone other than the same one person all the time who was your key contact, who basically distributed everything to you, to everyone else, you know, the hub of the spokes. So
Excuse me, you're saying that's how it used to be?
It was like that at one time.
Yep.
I think we've made a lot of progress in trying to get back to a model that replicates some of that. Thank you very much, Planning Department. But I want to make sure we don't go back and, you know, create a model that is spokes of the wheel without a hub. And I know you touched on that a little in your presentation, but if you could just touch on that some more, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. We, and what you might recognize the term, we used to have a office called the Central Permit Office, and the whole concept is you'd come in and you'd have someone who'd sort of be the front end, manage your permits, and then behind the scenes, you know, of course, different folks are looking at them. One thing I know, regulations and layers have gotten a lot more complicated in 30 years. We've moved back to, and I think you both were at the ribbon cutting of that Central Permit Office idea. Right. We're still evolving through a procurement process to get a integrated software platform and some final staff services, but I think we're still on that bridge to that road. And again, the idea is that you have one person that you work through the process. I know this position's a little different. It's someone who's sort of in between the customer and us, and definitely will help. Will be that intermediary contact who can help out. To the idea of the geographic area, we'd have to talk about it a bit more. We have tried some pilots with putting services in South County. Didn't get a lot of traffic. It's something we can come back to, and if through this program we learn that service helps, back to the idea of you go into South County, and if you're a rancher or farmer, you can get all those permits. It's something we can definitely explore.
Yeah, and you know, there obviously people, you know, for decades to come will need to interface with an actual human being, but we're also getting a lot more adept with technological interface in allowing people to do things online that they can never do, for lack of a better way to put it, to electronically and so forth. And I can only imagine that will continue. I'm not suggesting that would be any part of an appropriation for financial support from the board now. What I'm really concerned about is just that however people are interfacing, whether it's a phone call, whether it's online through a website or whatever, that as this goes forward, and I can mention this at the Board of Supervisors, it looks like this is going to pass, you know, get pushed there. we can talk about it some more, but maybe give some thought to it, is, Rob, is to, that, somebody doesn't feel like, as they're incubating and you see, and, the Ag Extension is helping them, and then they say, I'm not sure if I've got enough capital to do what you're suggesting. And then it's, well, go talk to the Small Business Development Corporation. Well, where are they? Well, they're over there. And so they go talk to them, and then they say, we want to see a few more things from you in terms of your business model here, in terms of how things are going to work. And they say, well, I'd have to go back to the Ag Extension and have them help me with that. And this is, I think, the runaround that, with all big governments, it happens. It's a $7 billion operation with many departments, and we get a little bit siloed. We've all heard that expression over and over again. So I'm just saying this is a huge opportunity to avoid the silo right from the beginning and say, this stuff has to work seamlessly, and that's food for thought.
Yeah.
I know you're pitching it that way. I'm just unclear exactly how the mechanics will work.
Right. I mean, typically it is one person in this, and as you know, I mean, it's really going to be the person that makes this program. You have to find that right candidate. And again, us looking at potential service providers. I know Sheila's here from UC Cooperative Extension, and then gentleman's here from the SBDC. It's almost a perfect merging of those services. Someone who has the business knowledge of business and knows the technical side of farming. I mean, I can only say at this point, when we get to the procurement process, we're going to try and look for someone who can provide that in one person or one service.
Got it.
Good.
Okay. That's so much.
I just wanted to say something. I'm Sheila Berry with UC Cooperative Extension,
Right.
and I wanted to say something about the one-stop shop. And I think it's realistic that this person could help with, different sort of agencies. But I wanted to remind you all that the issues are not just county regulations, but sometimes state regulations as well, or not just the planning department. So, for example, today, rancher contacted me about the upcoming Calero lease for grazing, and it's 88 pages, and it's daunting to them. And so, even having some help with other agencies that they deal with. So I see the one-stop shop as someone who would be able to interface with the different agencies that are impacting ranchers and farmers. And that's how it's worked in Sonoma County, where I have the most familiarity with the program, where the Ag and Buds actually even goes, in some cases, with the farmer rancher to whatever offices that they're having to deal with to help them through the process.
Right. I think we're saying the same thing here. I mean, I think it's probably important to most of us that it actually operate that way in real life. So I won't belabor it, but I know it's a priority in my office. Our offices operate very similar in that way in terms of constituent services. If somebody comes and says, I have a problem, and they start defining it, and we know it's a state problem or federal problem, we don't say, here's the phone number to call, good luck. We have somebody hook them up and stay with them until they know that the deliverables are starting to happen on the other end, or they reached a dead end. But we stay with it all the way through. And I think that's just the very basic culture that would have to be established here, that somebody is going to be your advocate until such point as we reach a stopping point. And there are no jurisdictional lines that anyone's going to throw at you. Sorry, we're not that. You need to call someone else. In this day and age, there's so many someone else's, you could spend a lifetime just trying to navigate. So I'm all for this just for that reason. Thank you for clarifying, those of you who responded.
I think we have a comment from Bill Kiala.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we've had a little experience here with Rob and with this housing program, and they seem to have streamlined the process as far as the permitting. Streamlined the process as far as the permitting. But the real streamlining needs to start right there, because when our first roundtable meeting, how many agencies is there, or departments? 12? I know it's a lot. And it's kind of mind-boggling when you go in there. If you want to see a rodeo, I've been there already. But to try to deal with all these agencies, so this, what you're talking about is be really important, but to make him effective, he has to be able to be, I would think, here, so that he can work with those agencies when people come in and have a problem. But that's where the streamlining really needs to happen, not only in the permit process to do an ag housing program, but through all the different departments. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else want to speak on the motion? Yes.
Aaron Gill, if I could, I want to speak definitely in favor of this ag ombudsman person or whoever it might be. The permit process is not an easy one to get through, for sure, and it's expensive, as Eric has talked about, as whether other people in the ag community. And I was talking to Paul Mirasu just a while back, and he says, well, if your regulations weren't so complicated, maybe they wouldn't be so tough to get through. And it's kind of a little bit of common sense that comes from the ag community as to we're going to be spending a lot of money trying to have somebody actually simplify the system. And it's kind of goes backwards saying, why can't we make a simpler system? Kind of a KISS thing. So it's just a little bit of kind of bringing that about is that, maybe our systems are more complex than they should be for the ag community, and maybe we should go ahead and review those, and it'd be helpful for the ag community to be, I guess, coming to some sort of a point where the ag community understands more of what the system is and adapts to them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on the motion? John?
So one of the concerns I have, I think it's a great idea, but we have also 3 cities involved. We have the city of San Jose, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy, and also the unincorporated area. Is this ombuds individual going to have the knowledge of being able to work in the permitting processes within those jurisdictions as well? In addition to the unincorporated area, is this solely for the county, or is this going to be at all? This is a question.
Yeah, I can respond. It would be a county-funded position.
Yeah.
To the extent our agriculturalists interface with the cities, I'm sure they'd be there as a resource to help. I'm assuming most of the permitting traffic is through the county.
Absolutely. And as was mentioned earlier, too, with our UC Cooperative Extension rep, that there are state laws that come into play that overlap both county and city. So that'll be a benefit. But there's very little that's in the city. We good?
Okay, thank you. All in favor, signify by aye.
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 Opposed, abstentions? That carries unanimously. We'll move on to item 6.
That's how you streamline an agenda item right there.
This is considering recommendations to the Department of Planning and Development relating to an ag incubator business plan.
If it's possible, if the task force will entertain it, we sort of looked at the procession of 6 and 7. If it's okay to switch the process to have 7 first, it's a better lead into the incubator. This is the brand and identity signage program.
Sure, seeing no objection, we'll take 7 out of order. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll turn it over to Michael Meehan.
All right, so the purpose of this presentation is really is twofold: to share where we're at with the branding and marketing component of the agricultural plan, as well as to solicit some feedback on these initial concepts. So we're going to walk you through just a brief overview of where we're at, understanding that we have a team of consultants actively working on this, and that we will come back to the task force with more tangible deliverables as well as actions, but we wanted to use this opportunity to bring the task force up to speed as well as to solicit any input. So this was a key component of the ag plan, and we, in that plan, charted out branding and marketing as an opportunity for ag not only to be preserved, but to be understood, identifiable, and valued by the community. We see this focus area of branding, education, and awareness strategy. I'm just going to move this little hand out of there. As an integral part of the whole, and we think there's a lot of overlap between all of them, and we'll hear a little bit about that in the discussion of the Ag Incubator next. But we think it's an important one to draw out and to see as an umbrella for unifying all of the other components under a brand for Santa Clara Valley. So the goal is really the increased viability and visibility of agriculture simultaneously. So we think that we can create a bit of a positive feedback loop, if you will, between the economic development measures, the policy measures, as well as the financial incentives and the branding of this space. Education is one big way to do this, talking about the ways in which the ag industry has evolved and exists today, talking about the co-benefits and ecosystem services provided by having agriculture in our region, general awareness of the history in Santa Clara Valley, as well as awareness, again, of the agriculture as it exists today. Branding, when we say branding, we're talking about the mutual association between the lands as we've mapped in the agricultural resource area and generally the working lands of Santa Clara Valley, and an association with the products that come out of those lands, as well, again, as those co-benefits that come along with it. And then lastly, marketing, not only an opportunity to market the products and to create some sort of small market advantage for those who are interested in procuring or purchasing locally produced food, but also a way to market towards ag tourism and the food economy overall. So we did an initial survey of a variety of regions that are known for their agriculture. This is just a couple of them up here. Two that we'd like to focus in on are the Capay Valley and the Hudson Valley. So the Capay Valley is within Yolo County, and it's really an unincorporated inter to the county area, if that's an appropriate way to put it. It's a valley that is often sidelined within the county as a whole, but has a robust history and a robust current economy for producing goods that come into the Bay Area, that come into the Sacramento area, as well as a number of events and agritourism there as well. They had a Capay Valley Vision campaign that was grounded in community engagement as well as the businesses and the government there. And that was really about what they wanted their valley to look like as a whole. And agricultural preservation rose to the top within that envisioning process. And then out of that emerged Capay Valley Grown, which was a brand that farmers could use, but was similarly used by, I think, Cache Creek, the casino there, not Capay Valley Grown, but the Capay Valley brand, as well as a number of other initiatives there. This was very much anchored by the farms. They had a long history. Full Belly is a very well-established farm that hosts the Hose Down Festival every year that draws a number of residents from the Bay Area. And there's also a number of larger organic farms that do delivery to the Bay Area. And so they were able to, through these existing businesses, to attract a lot of visitors. And when visitors would come, were able to co-brand their operations as well as their region and create a name for Capay Valley. This really came out of an impulse from the farmers to create a sense of pride for the agricultural products and the history of agriculture there, as well as an interest in using the mechanism of the AVAs, or the American Viticultural Areas, to kind of distinguish a place and to qualify the benefits of produce coming from there. So to contrast, the Hudson Valley spans 13 counties, and there are a number of initiatives all through that area that have capitalized on Hudson Valley for its history and its contemporary agribusiness. The Hudson Valley Agribusiness Development Corporation being chief among them, as well as a number of really world-renowned cultural producers, if you will, around agriculture. So a number of restaurants such as Blue Hill, the Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture there, which is on the Rockefeller Estate, and then some aggregators such as the Hudson Valley Harvest, which draws products from, I believe, 60 farms and dairies and distributes them as a food hub throughout the region. So to contrast, the Hudson Valley effort was not only much larger, and there is no single Hudson Valley brand, but collectively through particularly the investment of the city of New York as well as the state of New York, they have preserved agriculture and invested in economic development measures to continually boost and again create this positive feedback loop between the association of Hudson Valley with agriculture and the businesses that are located there. So as one example, the city of New York has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into preserving 24,000 acres in the Hudson Valley, seen as a sort of natural infrastructure for filtration of their water supply. And not only were they preserving the land, but they were working with the farmers who were managing that land to ensure that their businesses succeed. And so out of the Watershed Agricultural Council, they actually came up with a number of marketing campaigns for local produce. Similarly, the state has poured a lot of money through the Economic Development Division into developing food hubs, distribution centers, farm-to-school purchasing programs, and they've also done a bit of policy streamlining in order to create new markets. So a good example is that they passed a law streamlining the ability of breweries and cideries to open shop in order to promote ag tourism and to get folks out into the Hudson Valley. Similarly, if you're driving along the Taconic Parkway, you'll find that these little buildings that look like maybe old-fashioned gas stations, you drive in there and there will be products from all of the farms in the region. And these are state-owned buildings that were vacant for decades, and the state identified them and said, why don't we revamp them and why don't we use this as an opportunity to market the products as well as enhance the experience of people visiting the Hudson Valley. So again, I want to reiterate that this is so much of creating a sense of place and a brand for that sense of place is about creating this positive feedback loop between economic development and the brand identity, if you will. So we want to acknowledge that there are a number of local initiatives, and we see the efforts to create a brand for Santa Clara Valley as working alongside these. I won't go into each of them, but they each have their merits and could be worked in collaboration with the Santa Clara Valley brand. And I want to just briefly go through some of the initial products that were part of the ag plan and that are currently the basis for what our team of consultants are working on. So at the very basic level, when we're talking about marketing branding, we're talking about creating a name. Santa Clara Valley is an iconic one and a simple one, and associating with that name something as simple as a logo type. Then using that in a variety of applications, whether it's on signage, whether it's on a label, on a package that you're seeing, whether it's in educational materials, and targeting a variety of audiences. One of the things that was really compelling in the plan for a number of the readers at the state level and otherwise was the photography used to really depict what is special about this place, as well as the stories of the farmers who are here, and really focusing on the human level of what the business is and who the people are and what the history is of this area. And so we see that as being a key component of this branding and marketing campaign as well. We think that this could be adapted into any number of avenues, whether it's through ads or posters or billboards. Both of these are hypothetical brochures or pamphlets talking about the ecological benefits associated with agriculture. That's just one concept that has come out of this process. Similarly, we think that having a website, we think that doing a number of videos focusing on profiles of the farmers in the valley is a good idea. We think there's a lot of possibilities here. But the most immediate and prominent possibility, we think, is in doing a signage campaign. And so here we have 4 different categories that we've been using to think about what a signage campaign would look like. One is really about placemaking. You're imagining someone driving through the area, coming over a hilltop into a particularly iconic view of the valley floor and seeing a sign that says, "Welcome to Santa Clara Valley," or "You're entering Santa Clara Valley." Another category is what I've been calling Mind the Ag, or Share the Road. And I'm not sure exactly what the message would be or how it would be depicted, but this is originating from the feedback that we've heard that a lot of folks are driving on agricultural roads because Google Maps or otherwise has told them to, and there's not a degree of mindfulness around the agriculture that's happening in that area, and we want to raise awareness of the working lands and their value there. There's another category, which is what's growing here. We think there's a lot of merit to simply pointing out to people on the road and in our parks and otherwise that are where they're adjacent to working lands, to inform them of what is growing there, whether it's a cherry orchard or a walnut orchard or a field of peppers. We think that the more that constituents, voters, consumers identify the foods that they eat on a daily basis with the lands that they're driving through on a daily basis, we think that that connection is really a vital part of this. And then lastly, Your Lands at Work is another area where we're thinking that education and awareness around the co-benefits and the ecosystem services provided by agriculture, as well as the folks working those lands, that's an important message to communicate. So, as I said, right now our team of consultants we're working with is developing these signage ideas. We plan to come at the final Ag Task Force meeting with a proposal to begin developing and installing these signs. That will tie into a larger strategic branding plan that we would hope any number of farmers or ranchers could voluntarily participate in, whether for marketing their products or for ag tourism or otherwise. We think that we really need a website and possibly an initial social media strategy in order to, you can imagine someone driving by and seeing a sign and wanting to know more. If there is a hashtag or a URL that they're able to follow, they can learn more about the ag in their area as well as what we're doing to preserve it. And lastly, something else that we'll present to you in the final task force is institutional partner development. And we've been doing a lot of outreach to the institutions, particularly the tech companies, that are very interested as well in seeing these lands preserved, seeing the produce from these lands in their dining halls, and they want association with it as well. And we think there are a lot of opportunities there that we're also exploring for partnership with the corporate space. With that, that's the end of this presentation, and I would solicit any feedback or input on what I've presented or on anything that I haven't covered in terms of the direction we're heading.
Laurel.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. It's very exciting to see Santa Clara Valley have a brand and start actually thinking about how we can market this area, this very special place. I really appreciate the thought, and I know that this is still in development. Monterey County has done a very effective sign campaign, and I'm sure everyone has seen them, where it's the cutouts of the animals or the people, and they don't say really any words, but it's incredibly effective.
Just a big artichoke.
Exactly, yeah. So I think, and I know that some of the signs in our packet are really just placeholders, but I'm hoping that we can generate the same kind of excitement and buzz that I know visitors who are outside of California and see those for the first time get really, really excited. So good work, and look forward to the next steps. Thank you.
Hi, Ms. Howard.
Thank you. Yes, Michael, thank you for the report. And I, too, am very excited about this particular subject. As you know, I ran the Gilroy Welcome Center. I wanted to let you know, back in about 2010, City of Gilroy did a complete branding study. We were the lead agency on that. And we certainly want to make sure that the branding conversation that we have about Santa Clara County involves maybe the cities that already are doing some of this. I mean, ag tourism obviously is a part of our message. And I think rather than duplicating or having something that is not really in sync in what we're already finding works, would not be time well spent or dollars well spent. So your consultants, not knowing who they are, I would really encourage that there's outreach to the marketing that's already being done in South County, and because we have the practicality and can show you data about what's working. We're certainly finding social media is a key component, especially Instagram, and you're in that group that loves Instagram. The rest of us maybe not so much, but it's very important that there's a whole picture about that. And rather, we feel good about signs, we feel good about things, but if you can't put them anywhere, and that's really a problem in South County, we have to deal with that. And I think we have to look at how do we address that. Also, you want to identify who you're going after. We certainly have one message for our visitor as a destination visitor versus the locals. And so you want to be clear about that as well. So I certainly want to offer whatever we can do to help support that and to be sure you're working in cooperation with our South County cities.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, other comments or questions on the report? Supervisor Warsman?
Thank you. I'll just have one statement to make, and then I've got a question for you. If you can go back to slide 16 in the interim. And Jane, if you could use this opportunity to, unless it's a secret anymore, if it's not a secret, to please announce what acknowledgement, recognition the Gilroy Welcome Center and you just received.
Thank you. Yes, I was just forwarding to Supervisor Wasserman today. Last week, we received word from Visit California. Visit California is the state's tourism agency. They have about a $150 million budget to promote visitors to the state of California. They have a part of what they use to help promote their message are California Welcome Centers. And recently, there was an RFP that went out to destinations throughout the state to add more welcome centers, and we were just sent notice that we have been designated as a California Welcome Center in Gilroy. It will be the only one in Santa Clara County. It will be the closest one now because the other one is in San Francisco and south of us in Salinas. So it's a really big deal, and I just have so many visions of how this can all work together in terms of getting a message out and partnering with the county, because this is about promoting California, but they want that local emphasis, and this is a prime opportunity as we look at how we will transition from Gilroy Welcome Center to California Welcome Center. So that's a pretty big deal. Thank you.
The only one in Santa Clara County and only one south of San Francisco, and San Francisco doesn't even have a football team, so we're way ahead of them. So back on your page 16, Michael, you were asking as far as some comments, feedback. I like everything you say except share the road. That wasn't immediately clear to me. I'm thinking watch out for bicyclists.
Yeah.
Is what I'm thinking. So that's my one-on-one feedback to you. The other ones I think are good work in progress. Is most of this happening in-house? Have we hired outside? Is it a combination?
It's a combination. Yeah.
Okay. It's wonderful. I think the point brought up about not having conflicting signs. I think about the wine trail signs that we went through so much to get with the brown that's recognizable. And when people drive from Morgan Hill to San Martin to Gilroy, they see those, because you're going by at 30, 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, depending on what road you're on. When they see that, they know what that means. Okay, so we need something, I think, that is consistent through South County, which is working with the cities. I think what you mentioned in your presentation, and was kind of directed to the farmers and the Farm Bureau and agriculture in general, whether it's a picture of a big artichoke, or as I've been asked many, many times, why don't the farmers put up a sign as you're driving by, bless you, what are they growing there?
Right.
Okay, because the city dwellers, they don't know an asparagus from a lettuce head.
Yeah.
Okay, so they don't know. So they're interested in what that is. And you specifically mentioned with the farmer's consent. So what I envisioned was a logo, words, color, sign, design, whatever, and then the farmers, with Farm Bureau's help, this being made aware to them and simply getting their permission and not dealing with Caltrans or anything else like we had to do with the wine trail, and putting it on the fencing in an appropriate place, appropriate size, not blocking a corner intersection, line of sight, public safety, all that stuff. But working with the farmers to do that, which should be a win-win.
That's exactly our intention, and
Wonderful.
that's the model in KPay as well.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to receive the report.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. On the motion, let me just say congratulations on all the progress. I think there's parts of it that are really brilliant, actually, particularly putting a face on it. I think so often, especially in areas, whether they're marketing areas or even political areas, frankly, where people are marginalized or
Invisible.
folks are just not really understanding where the human element is behind the product. You know, we really lose a lot, and I think it contributes ultimately to not only misunderstandings, but worse, polarization in the community, the kind of things that we talk about in other items here about the interface between ag and suburban settings, for example. Having lived through that on the farming side, just amazing how much lack of understanding there is, that there are people working really, really hard trying to get crops delivered to you, and if they raise a little bit of dust, pardon our dust, but you know, I think when you show a family, when you show a couple, like some of these slides are, if you showed any of the farmers that were in the room right now associated with that dust and what they're doing and how they're trying to scuffle to make a living, but to get products shipped in some cases across the country or throughout the world, it makes a big difference. It's just how I think you've understood that it's how marketing works now in this society. It's very much people are getting their relationships through images on TV, you know, through sitcoms, through posters, through pictures, through social media. Fortunately or unfortunately, that's how people are getting it. It's not by, you know, walking into the neighbor's orchard anymore and shaking hands and saying, you know, how many tons of cherries are you going to pick this year? That doesn't happen. So you've got to replicate that, you know, with in the ways that you're doing here. So great job on that. I'm just curious, at the end, you're talking about bringing the final, so to speak, at the end of the task force, and that's not that far off. But is it because you have a lot more to do, or just because you feel that's the appropriate time to bring forward the final recommendation?
Yeah, we're working on a cost estimate of what the signage program would entail, and we also are working on presenting final expressions of these just kind of initial ideas that I shared with you today, so that there's something more tangible to look at.
All right, great. Well, good luck with that, and we'll call for the vote on the item. If there's no other comments, all in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Did you have something? No? Opposed? One no? Okay, and abstentions? All right, that passes. It does pass with a majority vote, with Keala being the no vote. Thank you.
I think Chris Borello has your hat, Eric. I said, I think Chris Borello has your hat. You see that?
So now we're going to go back to item 6. Is that correct?
Yep.
All right. And just to clarify that is the recommendations on the Ag Incubator Business Plan.
Peggy and I need some help on the PowerPoint for this. Just give us 1 second. We'll get it set up.
Control L. Good to know. All right, so moving on, I'm really excited to present this idea. I think it is a good nexus for a number of the things that we're talking about, not least of which the branding and marketing opportunities, as well as the issues faced by intermediate and beginning farmers, as expressed in our conversation about the ombuds role. So want to emphasize that this is really about small business development, this proposal for an ag incubator. And really what we're talking about is intermediate farmers rather than training beginning farmers. This is a proposal that's going to land mostly within the economic development strategy within the agricultural plan, but it intersects with any number of the other initiatives that we've put forth and the 4 other focus areas here. So what are we talking about when we say an ag incubator? Sometimes folks say ag park. Sometimes these programs do involve more training for beginning farmers. Sometimes there's a lot more hands-on service being provided. But fundamentally, we're talking about access to land. We're talking about facilitating access to land for beginning and intermediate farmers. And in our case, I think the demand that we've seen is primarily for mid-career or intermediate farmers. Typically, ag incubators are a single location, anywhere between 50 and 500 acres, and they're host to multiple small to medium-scale farm enterprises. So this can be anything from a 1-acre flower farmer who on the weekends is spending her time growing flowers for cut arrangements for a wedding, up to larger operations, let's say at 30 acres, doing 4 farmers markets with 600 CSA members, as is the case with Spade and Plow, one of our local farms here. We're talking about having a variety of plot sizes within an ag incubator. So if you imagine this single parcel, on average, let's say 200 acres, within that 200 acres, it would have the flexibility of splitting that up into a number of plots, anywhere between 1 acre to say 30 acres. We're talking about flexibility in the tenure. So I'm a farmer who has been in training for a number of years. I've spent 5 or 6 years managing somebody else's farm, and I'm looking for a place to incubate my business, to really hone my skills, to get my spreadsheets to where I feel like I have good margins, and to hone my practices. I want to be able to potentially incubate my business in this location where I could have a tenure of a number of years to develop my systems in place, but I also would like maybe to be on a one-to-one, from year to year lease, so that if I have land availability, then I can pounce on that. Affordable leases are really important. Some of these programs, and again, these are modeled off of ag incubators from around the country. Some of them offer zero-cost leases. Some of them are subsidized. Many of them are at market rates because the idea is to create a solid financial and business plan based off of market rates in order to go to graduate from the incubator and enter the ag economy. Often there's shared infrastructure and equipment, and so many of these smaller farmers, particularly vegetable farmers, will need specialty equipment. So for example, a bed shaper for their raised strawberry beds. It's a very expensive implement for a small startup operation to have, and if there are a number of farms co-located in one area, they're able to lease that equipment either from one another or from the incubator as a host organization. Similarly, there's a need for shared infrastructure, washing, packing, refrigeration, and that would be cooperatively shared on site as well. This can be a nexus for professional development, so you can imagine that grant opportunities or that UC Cooperative Extension classes could be held on site, business planning classes. And there's also a lot of opportunity for access to markets. A number of these ag incubators will aggregate and distribute the food collectively. Sometimes they'll have a farm stand on the property, such as the one at Marshall Cottle, where locals can come and purchase directly, and each of the farms are able to present their goods. So these are kind of the core components to an ag incubator generally. To zoom in a little bit more specifically, I'm going to share the example of the Intervale Center, which is outside of Burlington, Vermont. This was, actually it's within the city of Burlington, Vermont. It's 700 acres. It was zoned out of residential use in 1987 because it's in a floodplain right off the Winooski River, which you see snaking through there. In 1988, once it was zoned out of residential use, this land was used, there was a proposal by a collective of local business owners, farmers, nurseries, as well as the community and the local government to put 360 of those acres under management of a foundation. And that foundation's goal was to incubate farm businesses and to provide public access. So 135 of those 360 acres today are cultivated by roughly a dozen farms. These farms vary in size, again, from as small as half-acre hydroponic greenhouse operation up to 30 acres. And there's a variety of business models, selling into restaurants, selling to farmers markets, and otherwise. Some of these are more permanent than others on this location, enabling the farmers to invest in infrastructure, such as this hoop house that you see here. Others are again, just testing out a business opportunity, and they'll just be there for a couple years. And as an example of equipment, they share tractors, they share tools. The nonprofit that has taken over management of this location, although the property is owned still by the city, the nonprofit leases the use of the equipment, which each of the farms budget for and schedule when they're able to use it, so that they can get the maximum use out of those pieces of equipment. And there are shared facilities for packing, for refrigeration, for the wash stand operation as well. Similarly, they have created in more recent years an Intervale food hub where they aggregate products from the farms on that location as well as farms throughout the region, and they offer these products to local grocery stores, to restaurants, and in the form of a CSA share, which, if you're not familiar with, is sort of a weekly or bi-weekly bundle of food produced locally and seasonally by the businesses in your area. So if it's not obvious, there's a nexus here with branding and the institutional partner development. I alluded to that piece of reaching out to tech companies, and this is something in our initial conversations with them that they're very interested in being involved with because of the opportunities for them to spend time in the public access piece, as well as the difficulty with which they have found purchasing local food is. And part of that is the scale of farm and the availability of smaller scale beginning farms that are better suited to plugging into their dining system. So again, we hope for this positive feedback loop between building new businesses as well as creating a sense of place for Santa Clara Valley. We think that this is a real physical grounding of the ag plan and can serve as a sort of keystone for the implementation of the plan as a whole. And we think that whether it's signage, education, or otherwise, like Marshall Cottle, that this really provides a lot of opportunities for stacking the benefits. So again, this is about increasing the viability as well as the visibility, making agriculture seen and accessible to folks who otherwise don't have exposure. This can take place in a number of ways, and again, I'll walk through some of the example of the Intervale to demonstrate that. The Intervale has an event every Thursday through summer months called Summervale, and they have live music, they have food, they have local breweries and wineries come, and it's a real community building opportunity hosted by the farms and the center. They also host a number of weddings, private corporate offsite events. They have yoga classes and painting lessons. Any of the agritourism opportunities that we see emerging and increasingly popular for urban folks, they have done a very good job of taking advantage. Similarly, there's an opportunity for education and demonstration, not only of consumers about where their food comes from, what's going on and what's growing in their local ag incubator, doing career development, working with youth, as well as a place for best practices, technological innovations. You can imagine a drone demonstration taking place there, and aerial photography. It's really a good opportunity to invite the public in and to share a space with the farmers. And then lastly, there's a great opportunity for placemaking, and again, this sense of public access. A number of these ag incubators, including the Intervale Center, have a number of public trails, a number of bike paths, where the public is able to visit and coexist with these businesses. And the proximity of the two, while it might seem a liability at first, has actually been a boon both to the education of the consumers as well as a boon for the businesses that are being incubated there. So why do we need one here in Santa Clara County? Again, the number one priority is really about access to land. There are a number of training programs and apprenticeships all over the country, and there's quite a concentration in the Bay Area. And as an example, there is an ag incubator in the Hudson Valley, and 3 of the participants in that ag incubator are graduates of the apprenticeship program in Santa Cruz. Now, they're not from the Hudson Valley, but the need for access to land is so dire that they moved to the Hudson Valley in order to participate in an incubator program to start their businesses. So we have dozens of programs graduating hundreds of young farmers who then go on often to manage other people's farms for a number of years, but unless they have off-farm income, an inheritance of land or wealth, it's very difficult for them to access land in areas with high speculative values such as here. Of course, there's an opportunity for economic development, as we've addressed. There's no shortage of opportunity here. I just learned of a brewery that's here in San Jose called New World Ales, which actually has a half acre of hops at the hop ranch that they're growing right off of 101 in San Martin, after they learned that Santa Clara Valley had a history of growing some of the best hops, and in the 1890s was acclaimed for the quality of the hops all over the world. So they decided this would be a cool opportunity for our brewery to make a connection to agriculture, to talk about the history, and they're using that to leverage their own brand and to make connections for their consumers. And I think that's just one small example. If you look at Manresa, the Michelin-starred restaurant in Los Gatos, they have a very close relationship with a farm, and the farm and the restaurant mutually benefit from that. And this is the same way in which many of the institutions that we've reached out to, including Google, Airbnb, and NVIDIA, are very interested in making these meaningful connections educationally and otherwise for their employees. So what are the next steps? We think that we've begun evaluating what kind of parcels are out there and what it could possibly cost. Our priority is for the best ground for launching ag businesses, so we think that having prime soils and water is of top concern. We think that the more visible and the more easily it's accessed by the public, it can be accessed by the public, the better. We think that the county should own it already, this property, or be prepared to acquire property to do so. And we think that it should be managed in collaboration, most likely with a nonprofit, so that the county itself is not managing the day-to-day operations. Again, these are typically between 50 and 500 acres, and we think the most appropriate size for the farm businesses that are starting in this region is about 150, 200 acres. Our early back-of-the-envelope cost estimate for, again, this is a very generous cost estimate, looking at business plans for the other ag incubators, is that the first 5 years of employing at least one full-time employee, the capital infrastructure needed, the improvements, well drilling, and otherwise, we set at $15 million. I think that's very generous, but we think that that sort of an acquisition would enable us to have serious conversations with landowners and with potential partners for management of this, and that's our starting place. But as is requested action of the task force, we would like to do a business plan to get more detailed information. So what are the next steps? As I said, we are recommending that we prepare an ag incubator business plan to begin to look at specific numbers and to not just have a back-of-the-envelope estimation. And we're also asking that the task force consider, if they believe that there's as much potential in this as we do, to allocate funds toward the acquisition or development of an ag incubator. I think that there's an opportunity to work with existing lands. We've begun conversations with the Parks Department about lands that are out there. We think it's important to convert fallow land or otherwise target land that is under risk of development, and we think that that is mutually beneficial to the other goals of the ag plan. And so we think that if we had strong support for this going out into the community, we could have a serious search for an appropriate location to create a Santa Clara Valley Ag Incubator. So that's what I've got for you.
All right. Thank you for the presentation. Questions and comments. We'll start with Supervisor Wasserman.
Thank you, Supervisor Cortese. Thank you again, Michael, for your report, and Rob for your involvement as well. I spoke with Don Rocha this afternoon after reviewing this as far as parks. He's our parks director. Just wondering, out of the 7 appointees that we have here this evening, how many of you have had a chance to visit Marshall Cottle Park? Okay. Yeah, you I'm not including, because I know we're there. Marshall Cottle Park is a 250-acre parcel. The county received, the state owns a third of it, and on Saturday, October 6th, a couple of Saturdays from now, will be the annual Harvest Festival at Marshall Cottle Park. And I welcome everybody to go on out there. From Google Maps, it looks like Central Park in New York, because it's all this green and brown surrounded by all this high-density San Jose housing. And over the last couple of years, our Parks Department has been working that to create a path to preserve the house that was there for Walter Lester. Please, if you can, go sometime on October 6th to Marshall Cottle Park and see what's going on there. One of the things that you'll see, besides all the exhibits and all the displays, is that the University of California at Berkeley has a co-op set up there where the county has given them a certain amount of land to do what they do, the testing, the partnership, the involvement for the benefit of agriculture in our county and statewide as well. If you'll go there, you'll also see a section of land the county has given to an organization called the Master Gardeners. Walk through the Master Gardeners. It'll be open. It'll be on display. Walk through there and see what it is that they're doing with the county gift of land for this type idea that Michael's talking about. Also in the front, as you drive in, you will see what's called Jacobs Farms. Are the Jacobs brothers?
No, don't know.
Don't know. Okay, well, they look a lot alike, okay? But the Jacobs Farms are lessees of the county at a below market rate to help out, to make ends meet. But that's a real good example of county lands that were used to preserve agriculture, which is what the county's doing. But walk around there. I mean, it's impressive. It's amazing. And if the county hadn't done what they did, and with a lot of help from Supervisor Cortese to make it happen, that would all be high-density housing. And instead, there's hundreds, there will be thousands of people there on Saturday, October 6th, learning about the Valley of the Heart's Delight, learning about Santa Clara Valley, learning about agriculture, learning about that area. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. We'll have a booth there. Come by and say hi. Michael, I understand high-tech incubators. I understand that idea, big old warehouse and a bunch of people wanting to start up and a place to work and hook up to the internet and all the rest. I read this in preparation of tonight's meeting, and it's the first thing tonight that I've had some reservation about. Now, maybe in your conversations with parks, they will say, well, here's a section of land that makes sense for exactly that. And if that's the case, I'm in support. If it's to go out and look to acquire land, existing farmland, be it 50 acres, be it 15 million, whatever, I think that's a much bigger lift. In addition, for those of you that don't know this, and I know Supervisor Cortese knows it very well because almost all of it is in his district, half of county lands, half of the lands owned in Santa Clara County, half of the acreage that Santa Clara County owns are grazed by cattle. We have people with cattle that need their cattle to eat, and we need the fuel and stuff. We need it to be mowed down, and it's a collaboration, a cooperation for a relatively nominal fee to do that. So there's a whole lot of county land in one way or another being used. I just wanted to throw that out to you too, because a lot of people, although most of the people in here know a lot about ag, and some about cattle, and some about peppers, and some about garlic, and et cetera, the county's doing a lot in that area. And while I can see this recommendation perhaps going forward to the Board of Supervisors with approval, haven't heard from Supervisor Cortese yet, or anybody else, I'm a little more on the fence on this one. Thank you.
Yeah, just, I'm not sure, and you might want to clarify at some point. I thought what I heard, it's my interpretation, of course, was that they were collaborating with Parks in terms of
yes,
properties that Parks might have in their strategic plan or their own deliberation that are out there.
And I'm in favor of that.
They haven't acquired it yet, but they know where it is, they know who the owners are, and there may be some other objectives besides this for keeping it in open space. That's why Parks was looking at it in the first place. Is that fair?
Yeah,
I
and
kinda heard it
there are
that way.
some locations as well that that are already in parks that might also be appropriate, that either had other intended uses down the line or that are compatible with this use. And in terms of the acquisition, I should also say, I meant to clarify that in looking to preserve agricultural land, in buying conservation easements through the ACE program, part of the value proposition, if you will, of an ag incubator is that we're already paying, in many cases, a majority of the value of the land for the easement in order for a private landowner to continue to be able to operate there. And the value proposition of an ag incubator is that you're creating new businesses as well as the compounding effect of having thousands of people visit, as is the case at Marshall Cottle, on a location by going that extra length. And so I think that should we be successful in establishing a sustainable funding source for an ACE program and the means to evaluate land that is most targeted for preservation, that this should be a consideration, and that that is the vision for doing a fee acquisition, where instead of simply taking ownership of the easement, that we would take in-fee ownership of it. So that was the model.
I think the two supervisors are right with you on most of that. I don't know if Supervisor Wasserman is thinking the same thing as me, but the complexity of getting onto Parks land is a whole nother animal. So, I mean, just
If I may,
something
it
to keep in mind is
Yeah.
it might be a lot cleaner just to go in and determine land that hasn't been acquired by Parks, or that's otherwise, maybe it's county-owned land, but for some reason, some kind of surplus land, that's fine. It's just we know, we're very familiar, I'm sure you are to some extent as well, but the complexities with trying to deploy uses that are not traditionally considered pure Parks uses under Park Trust Fund acquired property has been a matter of contentious hearings in the sport chambers over the years. So it doesn't mean we agree with it. It just means it's a little bit of a lightning rod. So I don't know if that's what you were trying to say as well, but
Yep.
just that's putting the cart before the horse a little bit, but it's worth keeping in mind.
And if I may, Supervisor.
Yes, please.
Because of your question, Michael answered something, which was if we were looking at an easement with a particular farmer, also might bring up, well, perhaps we purchase the property. Then you've got something different going there, because if you own the property, you can do the ag incubator.
Exactly.
Buying an easement is not saying we'll give you money for an ag easement, and then we get to use your land as we wish to.
Right.
So what his question caused you just to say a minute ago, I did not see in the report. So if this goes forward, please include that.
That scenario.
Okay, yes,
Yeah.
where it's a step beyond an ag easement, where we actually purchase in fee simple.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up the Marshall Cottle example. I think in his, of course, that's, the uses there, as much as possible, have been sort of a replication, if you will, of his vision, Walter Cottle Lester's vision about what should be and what shouldn't be on the property. But I know, having worked for him and with him and known him personally, that he really did have a vision of that property inspiring young people, high school, high schoolers who would come out and actually see working farming operations and perhaps get interested in agribusiness or just small scale farming themselves. And I'm not sure we've quite reached that level out there yet, but I do think it's, even there, that piece of it at least is consistent. So maybe that's somehow there's a way to work with parks to make sure that they're at least, it almost goes back to the branding discussion, they're at least bringing that conversation in as they bring visitors and field trips of people through there, so that they're not just operating in a parallel universe and, again, the silos, right? There's a disconnect somehow. Anyway, other comments or questions on this or concerns? Yes, Mr. Keown.
Yeah, I'd like to, I've been at this a long time, Mike, and I like everything you're saying. It feels good. I think there's places for this, but we're in an ag preservation mode to save a lot of ag land, and this is a nice thing to do in certain areas, but what we're trying to do here is save ag land, and that's what I'm here for, to really not try to do all the, that's part of it, but to save that, you got to go into the commercial farms. The mortality rate of new farmers with families that have a lot of money to back them is very high. So if they make it 2 years, or they make it 3 years, they're usually broke by 5. And I'm not talking about wealthy families that have the money. Where is all this money going to come from? We can't even get a preservation program going. The big difference, if you get a preservation program, that's only half of the money. The rest of the money, it cost me $6,000 to grow an acre of bell peppers. It cost me another $6,000 to $8,000 to harvest it. That's 1 acre. So you're talking about going into the county, going in to invest in these things on a small scale. You want to do it, figure out how to pay for it. But as far as I'm concerned, this committee here today is to serve. We want to preserve ag land, and there's 12,000 acres, and we got about maybe a window of 10 years to try to get our hands around this. And they're starting today, but I love these programs, and I think there's room for all of these things in small scale farms and different. There's all kinds of farming, but if you really want to get down and get dirty and preserve farms, you guys sitting back there saying, "Oh, how wonderful!" Mr. Davini knows how wonderful farming is. It's a tough deal. I mean, if you haven't been broke once, you're not a farmer. You've had to been out there and eat the dirt and try to make and get your kids to school and do all that, then you're a farmer. And it sounds wonderful, all these wonderful things. The economics of these little programs, to think that you're going to get so much money because you grew this thing organically or otherwise to keep your farm running, you better figure out a way to keep that farm running other than the economics of trying to do that. I love the ideas, but pragmatically, they don't work. Period. They don't work on a large scale. They're good for a small scale, but we're looking at trying to preserve this land here in Gilroy, Morgan Hill, and we need to get money. They didn't even fund our deal. The state turned down our property after 2 years of work on there, and the state turned it down. They made a final decision, came down from one department again. So, where's the money going to come from? We're working on money now. We have this subcommittee I still haven't figured out really to quickly get money into this thing. And Morgan Hill's got a plan. I think all the cities got to get involved. Gilroy, Morgan Hill, San Jose, all the way up to Peninsula got to get involved in getting money to make this thing work. If you really want to preserve agriculture, you can't go over there and say, hey, we'd like to take this land and sign an LOI and we'll see where we can find the money. It doesn't work. You got to have money in your pocket. When I go to buy a load of peppers, I got to have the money in my pocket. That's all. And I like all the ideas, and I don't know what your ag background is. It's probably much better than mine. I've been at it 40 years, and I still haven't figured it out. So let's pragmatically, I don't think this is a plan that should be here now. I think it should be a plan that you work on. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And before we move on, I just want to say it's almost a procedural question here, really, and maybe the county executive can assist with it just in terms of the spirit of how we proceed. I'm not clear that we go to the Board of Supervisors, under 6B of this and say, hey, will you direct administration to prepare an agricultural incubator business plan? And even just listening to Mr. Kiala's comments, does it make more sense that the committee, especially since this is convened also as Hewlett, as a standing committee of the Board of Supervisors, to say, go work, take what you heard today and go work on a draft business plan and bring it back here to look at. Let us kick it around some more so that, the people here with expertise can say, it's a little too heavy on field trips and education. It really needs to be more about, are you going to incubate actual farmers that are going to come in and take these ACEs? I'm just putting that out there as a hypothetical. Now, I don't know what it would look like after you prepare a draft, but it may be almost premature to go to the board and try to explain to them what this draft that we don't have yet looks like. And then it's a little premature maybe to ask people who are here, who are farmers, who are really want to know, if we do this and invest in it, is it going to take away from the ag preservation? Is it money that should be going into ACEs? Right. Is it going to complement that and actually accelerate? I think that's what incubate kind of means, create more buyers or more farmers for these ACEs as they come up. I think those are big questions that might merit, just a little more work and bringing this back document that we can look at and kick around. I just want to make sure procedurally that's acceptable for us as a committee, along with the task force, to just direct that at least that draft work be done before we start kicking things up to the board.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I think that's a better approach, to have the staff come back with at least the framework of an idea, because sitting here, there are many questions that you don't have even close to an answer. Like what I'm thinking is, where's this 200 acres? And how do we come up with the money to buy it? And, who's going to participate as a leaser or lessee, and lots of questions that come to my mind. And particularly, as Vito said, we have limited scope and limited resources. Are we there where we're comfortable enough that the ag-land will stay in the future, that we can move ahead with how to use it, or do we need to focus more on how to make sure it stays? So I think we need more information at the committee level, task force level.
Great. I just wanted to make sure we weren't overreaching the authority of the committee to task work to be done. But you're the boss. If you say it's okay,
that's fine. If I say it's okay, it's okay.
I was going to respond real fast. Sorry, just the first request we had was again what we know today are concepts, and I think the ideal is if we find land that's publicly accessed today, it's a good start. We just don't know the answer to those questions, but just to highlight what the staff had as modest recommendations was really to go off and do that business plan commitment. The one issue we have is timing. This task force times out in 2 months, 3 months at most. And so at least we wanted to get the inertia of moving on that plan. I don't honestly see us having a real business plan back to you before you expire. We can try, but I just know that's good. That takes a bit more time.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is it maybe, and I think county executive's in agreement at least, and we'll hear from others, but is we don't need to waste 2 more weeks waiting for the Board of Supervisors to convene. We can just tell you to go start working on the business plan, and if that's done before expiration of the task force, fine. If it's not, when we give the final task force report, we will tell them there's a draft business plan coming back, or we'll leave a subcommittee in place to work that over a little bit before it goes to the board. It's in no way a criticism of you bringing this forward to us. It's just, at least on my part, it's just a question of knowing our board and knowing the voluminous stuff that we're dealing with. I think it was 8.5 hours and thousands of pages last Tuesday. I don't want to go to them with something that's going to tie the board in knots with questions about what this looks like, where the money's going to come from, and so forth, without refining it a little more. And it's not to mean we're going to, obviously this is a public meeting, we're not trying to keep our colleagues in the dark, but just as a courtesy to them to say, we're going to try to bring you something that's, got some more meat on it, and, or if it's shot down, we'll just tell them that, the committee and the task force at some point never really got behind it. That's a possibility. But I think we know enough to say go do some more work on it and see if you can bring back a model that really does complement the growth of ag preservation, if that makes sense from your standpoint. Let's hear from others, because I don't mean to dominate the microphone here. Laurel Pavetti.
Thank you. I hear the beginnings of a motion just from all of your very good testimony. I just want to acknowledge the enthusiasm that staff clearly has for this idea, and I appreciate where that enthusiasm is. And I guess it's the city manager in me that starts adding up all the numbers. We've got grants, incentive programs, staff is doing branding, which costs money. So it just seems that we have a lot of things that we're moving forward. And I would just say, for whatever the rest of the duration of this task force is, I don't think it's necessary that we have to advance all of the ideas immediately. I think we do need to prioritize. And clearly this committee has said that the ACE program is number one. My, of course, personal favorite is all the land use issues, which we really need to tackle. And I'm concerned that if staff is doing all these other things, that we're really not going to be dealing with the fundamental land use policy issues and guidance that's going to be needed for actual implementation and streamlining and all other things that I know our farmers care about as well as other stakeholders. So I think the enthusiasm in seeing this presentation is great, but I think we just have to prioritize the resources and leave it to the wisdom of the board to guide that. But if I'm also concerned about another $50,000 going to a business plan. So if there's a way of doing it without a huge expenditure, that would certainly be my preference. Thank you.
Okay, others? Yes.
I just want to recognize Mr. O'Day here for supporting the Santa Clara County Farm Bureau's Farm to Table at Marshall Cotta Park a couple weeks ago. He provided the protein for us, and we had a wonderful time, and it was a great night, and it was well attended and well received. So I think Marshall Cotta Park is a good spot to go ahead and preserve or showcase agriculture. Brendan over at Jacobs Farms might be open to what the county's trying to promote here as far as agricultural production. I'm not sure if the county has an idea of what agriculture should be that it isn't right now and wants to compete with the private agricultural community. I'm not quite sure if that's the case or where that wants to go. So I know that there's a concern about using taxpayer dollars against private dollars in terms of how people produce things and how they work, and it is tentative out there in terms of agriculture. It is very fragile. And if you want to talk about that, I can speak directly to my own issues right now as to the frailty of agriculture in Coyote Valley. So I think that Mr. Keala's words about preservation stand very clear right now, and that should be that should be something that needs attention right now. Thank you.
And I would say this, the only, the life in this for me is just that the only incubation model I ever saw was when I went to Long Island, but the way that they used it, or I should say, and the way they used it, was primarily to take folks who were coming out of other private sector enterprises and basically needed some coaching before they would qualify them to take over an ACE. And had I not actually met a couple of individuals who had actually worked in New York City and for example, in big accounting firms and so forth that had benefited from that. Now they use, I think, the University of Georgia's program there. I don't know how they got hooked up with Georgia, but that would have been their equivalent of the ag extension here. It worked in some cases, but the idea was not to showcase so much. It was very much a two-step in terms of business operation. We can't put this person out there on a piece of property that we just paid a lot of money for, to get an ACE, as untrained as they are, but they're committed. They've got a little bit of working capital because of where they're coming from. We just need to make sure they're aware of all the implications before they get in. So that's a big investment, and it may be, what I'd like to see is a business plan outline, I think is what the county executive called a next step of it, to see if that's where we're headed, if that's where you think we're headed. I don't know at what point that you would actually implement the incubator, given the fact that we're in our infant stages of just getting into an ACE program. It seems that would be a discussion in the business plan itself. At what point do you actually kick this thing into high gear after you have so many acres of ACEs, or what? There should be some trigger that the program's got legs under it before we start worrying about too much effort on the incubation side. I just want to say to you folks, I have been an advocate not only on this task force but on others like our housing task force of bringing things forward incrementally, not just waiting 7 months and getting to the end and dropping all this on us. So thank you for doing that. And I just think we're asking for a little more increment here in terms of study and analysis before we, can think about getting behind it fully.
So Supervisor, I think it sounds like we're receiving the report but not forwarding to the board at this time.
Yeah, we're doing A. What I was suggesting is under B, instead of saying forward recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to direct administration, we just say that as a convening of the Hewlett Committee tonight, we refer back to the administration the preparation of a draft business plan for further discussion and analysis, but not to be forwarded to the Board of Supervisors at this time, if that's...
That works for me.
Okay, so I'll leave that out there as a motion, and I think yours was just a
I'll second.
And if we have discussion or concerns on the motion, please. Ms. Howard?
Just wanted to clarify what was said, and I just got that, so thank you. I'm good.
Okay.
I think Dr. Smith.
Anyone else, everyone comfortable with that? Dr. Smith?
No, I'm fine. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Okay, so all in favor of the modified 6A, 6B motion, signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? That passes. And I think that brings us to the last item, being 8, is a verbal report on the task force subcommittee. I'm not sure who's giving that.
I can go ahead and start, and if subcommittee members wanted to jump in. So you remember the subcommittee was created a few months ago. The intent was to take a really hard look at the sort of the crown jewel of the ag plan, which was the ACE program, and really look at short-term strategies. The subcommittee has met 3 times, initially to talk about an approach, second sat down with the Farm Bureau in early September, and then reconvened about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think the subcommittee's made good progress. There's a definitely strategy that's being pulled together that actually simulates some of the ideas and concepts that came out of Long Island that I think the full committee will recommend. I think it's going to take a little bit more time. I'm going to do a final write-up of the ideas we've talked about, show them to the subcommittee, and ideally we'd have them back to you next month or the month after. And with that, I'll bridge into the last point of discussion, which was we just realized recently that this The resolution to create this task force, actually this task force times out after next meeting. And on the work plan you adopted, it actually had 7 meetings. Next month is land use, which has its own, of course, a lot of discussion points in of itself, but we had always envisioned sort of that last wrap-up meeting, to your point, Supervisors Wasserman and Cortese, perhaps to bring back the Ag Incubator, bring back where are we going to go with the ACE program, bring back the signage and the branding program, where really the task force could come together and perhaps prioritize those issues and think about next steps. But that would be post-October. If you stayed consistent with the last Thursday of the month and wanted to go to next month, ideally that would be the Thursday after Thanksgiving. But long story short, I wanted to test the temperature of the task force on willing to extend to the end of the year the life of this committee, so we could have at least that one last committee, and after this, we'd work with the county council to go back to the board and ask for that extension.
Excuse me, Rob, when you say to the end of the year, you're talking November 29th?
The target meeting would be November 29th.
Not
yes.
December?
Let's not do it during the holidays. Yes, November
Well,
29th.
no, when you said the end of the year, I just wanted to make sure we were talking about an extra meeting, a final meeting being the last Thursday in November.
That's correct.
Great. I'm fine with that, and hopefully there's enough of the committee members that we can get everyone here, or at least a significant quorum, and do the wrap-up. And I just want to say something on that point real quick in terms of us keeping faith and taking heart in what we're doing. When the Housing Task Force met, they had a 7-month duration as well. Supervisor Wasserman was one of 2 supervisors that served there. I did not. I was president of the board. I called for the creation of it and then didn't put myself on it.
Smooth move.
It turned out to be a really smart move.
Yeah.
But anyway, that said, you know, when it got to the end, I was looking at what their wrap-up was looking at, and there was a deficiency there in funding, and this is, you know, something that's kind of hovering over all of us right now. Mr. Keala just, you know, identified as sort of the elephant in the room. That said, what it did do is it called out that issue. It says, this is what we need to do. These are the main issues, and this is what it's going to cost. And now, Board of Supervisors, you know, we, the task force, say you need to go find the money. We've done all this work. And I don't know if we'll be successful here of getting what we want at the end of the day, but that resulted in a $950 million housing bond going on the ballot and getting approved by the voters. So that ended up a very happy ending for that crowd or for that issue. I just want to keep the faith and keep heart that if we do this work, we've heard the county executive, you know, he's done the field trips, he's looked at everything, he's been here every night, and he's told us that he's committed to a strategy that helps us bridge the next couple years in terms of funding for ACEs, and then, you know, getting on the ballot or whatever it is that we have to do to fund it long term. But we're going to have to go back to the board at some point and, you know, really assert ourselves as a task force and say, this is our report, this is what we need, and now we need the board to go finish making it happen. So don't give up over the next 2 months here. We'll get there. Thank you. Supervisor, anything else?
Nope.
We are adjourned then, and we will be back on October 25th, 2018 at 5:30 p.m. in these chambers. And that'll be duly noticed to the public. Thank you, and thank you to our clerk, Peggy.
Everybody drive safely.